Okay, so we are looking at chapter 10, and if you have been reading chapter 9 was stratification in the US context. Chapter 10 is stratification in the global context. So I think it'll be pretty interesting to look at this chapter in connection with our last chapter. Probably by now you have some ideas about what social stratification is. With this chapter, we apply it to a global setting. So three main segments to look at. The first is global stratification and classification. We'll look at what global stratification is. We'll talk about how different classification systems have developed in terms of understanding global stratification. We'll use terminology from Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems approach. So the core and the periphery are key in terms of economic systems. You could think of this in terms of US capitalism, where we produce products here, but we produce a lot of products in low-wage sweatshops or maquiladoras, and then the people often in those countries or nations are part of the periphery because they're not part of being part of the main powerful nations that, say, have seats at the UN Security Council or really have GNPs that are very strong, very wealthy nations versus the less wealthy nations. So the work of Wallerstein, and then we'll talk about the World Bank's classification system of economies and economic systems. Section 2 is global wealth and poverty. We'll first look at the differences between relative, absolute, and subjective poverty. Those all have different meanings, and we'll get into that. Next, we'll describe the economic situation of some of the world's most impoverished areas. And we should, get into this in our discussions. How does this make us feel when we hear these stories about poverty? And then lastly, we'll look at the cyclical impact of the consequences of poverty. Poverty we see often as something, just like sociology talks about socialization through the life course, poverty can follow you over a lifetime. If you're born into a poor family, it's very hard for you to escape that. It's possible, but chances are you won't, or chances are you'll maybe only move up one rung or a few rungs on the social class ladder relative to your parents. And we talk about forms of social mobility, such as intergenerational mobility. And I think most parents, when they raise kids, they have the attitude that they want their kids to achieve more than them, to make more money, to have more success, and so forth. But very often, maybe more often than not, isn't the case. Lastly, Section 3, we'll look at theoretical perspectives on global stratification. We'll talk about modernization and dependency theories and what they offer us about global stratification here in Chapter 10 of our Introduction to Sociology class.